On August 21st, 2025, the trailer for Hollow Knight Silksong has been released by Team Cherry, and me and over 5 million people who have wishlisted the game have been hit with the hard decree that Silksong will be releasing in 2 weeks from the day of the trailer. So Team Cherry basically said to us, "Look guys, we know you're gonna play this game." I actually embraced these news and decided to challenge myself to something that I've been thinking about before almost a year ago. Now my chat wasn't really feeling it at the time, so I left it behind me for a while, but with the idea that Silksong will be releasing very shortly, I had to try to put this achievement behind me so I can go into Silksong knowing I've done it all. That's why I decided to beat the hardest challenge in all of Hollow Knight. If you don't know, in Hollow Knight's Godmasters DLC, you have a very neat training room to repeat all of the bosses you ever fought, but you also have the Pantheons, a group of boss rush challenges, with the hardest one being Pantheon 5, which is 42 bosses in a row, and the final boss is a completely unique boss to that final Pantheon. Now I have only ever beaten the 4 Pantheons in Hollow Knight, and I haven't played it since my last video, including it back in January. So admittedly, I was a little bit rusty, but that didn't stop me from setting myself the highly demanding challenge of beating Pantheon 5 before the release of Silksong. On my first day, I had to start off slow. For this day, I gave myself 2 simple challenges: getting more comfortable with the controls and the text, and doing my best to beat all 4 Pantheons. The first go around didn't exactly go as planned, as I died on the very last boss, but to my defense, I didn't have the right charms on, and despite that, I had a pretty good first run, and it actually helped me to boost my confidence. On my second go around, I dealt with Oro and Mato much better, and I decided to adopt an extremely aggressive approach to this fight, knowing that after this, I would get a resting spot where we can heal when we make it to Pantheon 5. For now, the first Pantheon was defeated in just over 7 minutes and 30 seconds. Surprisingly, on the second Pantheon, I was doing even better than on the first, finishing most of the bosses off while still having full HP, which was rather surprising, and even going as far as finishing the final boss on my very first try. Now, since I had the blue shields on, I decided that it wasn't really good enough of a win, so I went back and reset the run, and on my second try, not only did I beat the Pantheon once again, but I actually improved my time by over 30 seconds, finishing just over the 8 minutes mark. Now, considering that I was only 40 minutes into playing Hollow Knight again after a 7-month break, I was feeling pretty good about myself. But Pantheon 3 is where things started getting into some trouble. I died on my very first run to King Grim, which was a bad sign since we had to fight a cracked up version of him later on. But even after going back and getting my revenge on Grim, extremely difficult bosses like Zoth, and yes, believe it or not, Umu were still up after that. And those bosses were not easy to deal with. Umu in particular, there's something about this fight that destroys me, and you'll get to see more on that later. But if those weren't hard enough challenges to go through, I also had the kingpin of Pantheon 3 to deal with, Sly. Despite his very unintimidating demeanor, just like his name suggests, this is one little sly guy. It's a really fun fight, and it's pretty fast-paced, which I really enjoy, but it was so tough that I had to spend 30 minutes just practicing the fight so I can get more comfortable with it, and even beating it on the Ascended version before going back to challenge the Pantheon. Even after practicing Sly for so much, it didn't really matter because I kept on dying to earlier bosses over and over again. To be honest, I was quite surprised and honestly worried with how difficult the third Pantheon was, considering it's not even the hardest one, and I had to do that plus 32 other bosses in order to complete my goal. Of course, with enough practice, I did eventually beat Pantheon 3 at the not so impressive time of 10 minutes and 10 seconds. But I didn't let that hold my spirit down and rushed straight into Pantheon 4. Now, Pantheon 4 did come with its own set of challenges, and it also holds the game's second most difficult boss at the end of it. And even though I did have my challenges going on against Pantheon 4, dying to it quite a few times, Something about it felt a lot better than Pantheon 3. It might have been that the bosses were more enjoyable to me, but after getting some practice on Pure Vessel, I felt pretty confident in my ability. So now that my confidence was soaring high, I decided to give the actual Pantheon a try, and although I died a ton of times to the bosses in the beginning, when I actually managed to get into the Pure Vessel fight, nice. One more. Hey! There we go, dude! It only took us 4.5 hours to beat all the 4 Pantheons, dude. And I even took like an hour just to practice Pure Vessel and the Fly Guy. Ooh! Got him, boys! Pantheon 4 defeated! With all 4 of the Pantheons defeated, the real challenge of this video was standing in front of me. It was time to get started with Pantheon 5. I managed to do so surprisingly well that on my very first attempt I was running through the first 30 bosses with relative ease. It must have been the fact that they were still fresh in my memory, but eventually I did get stopped pretty close to the end. On the 38th boss, False Champion did claim my life, which was a very disappointing thing to happen because this is a pretty basic fight, but for some reason it got the better of me. Anyways, I decided to call it there for that stream and then began my week of practice. During this week, I just spent my time in the training room not doing a single Pantheon, and to be honest, I only worked on the 3 final fights. I didn't put too much training into this week, and I think overall I spent most of my time working on Pure Vessel and Absolute Radiance. And in total, I would say I put around 6 hours of practice throughout this week. In these 6 hours, I did manage to get a lot of reps in, and even a day before the stream, I managed to beat all 3 of the final Pantheon's bosses consecutively, and that was the marking point for me to know that I am capable of completing this challenge. So on the very next day, I hopped on stream, and it was time to test myself for real. So on the day of the challenge, I started up with a few warm-up runs. It didn't take me too long to get into the zone and feel confident enough in starting to do runs. My first run actually started off pretty well. I was running through the first and second tiers of bosses, but do you remember when I said that there are a few bosses that are going to cause a lot of trouble? Well, Umu was one of them, because even though I managed to reach this fight with full health and a little bit of soul left, Umu absolutely drained all of my resources, so in the lead-in fight with Nosk, I couldn't even stabilize and died to Sly. The next run was a little bit better because I managed to get past Nosk and Sly, but even though I made it to the No Ice fight with full HP and soul, I still got railed by this fight so hard that on the very next attempt, I decided to adopt the stay on one platform and move only when it's safe tactic. And yes, that basically meant I was playing like a little bitch. This was the best run up until then because I actually managed to get past the failed champion, which meant that it was time to fight the last 3 bosses. The first one was Nightmare King Grim. Okay, already at half, nice. Alright, final part. Oh my god, dude. Grim down. Let's go, boys. Alright, now we get to change our relics to what we're used to. Dog. We're going, chat. Oh, I don't want to get myself too hyped, dude. I don't want to get myself too hyped. Just stay relaxed. Do what you've practiced, Nathan. Here you go. Here we go. Ooh. Nice. No! That was so close, dude. That was so close, chat. If she didn't hit me, fucking, oh my god. So that was pretty rough. A really good run of absolute radiance ruined by the climbing sequence. This was actually my biggest fear because I knew that if I was able to get on top of there with full HP, I had everything I needed to get the radiance out of there. Unfortunately, that wasn't the run, but the day wasn't over yet. So on the very next run, I was admittedly pretty salty, but it didn't stop my focus. So I just kept going, and eventually, I made it to the fight with King Grim again. Nice! And after defeating him, it was onto the pure vessel, and then radiance again. All right. Okay, that's okay. Oh my fucking god! There's no way! In a week! Slash her ass! Oh my god! I actually beat Pantheon 5 in a fucking week. Let's go, dude! Before Silksong, I told you, chat! I told you I can do it! Oh my god, I'm the GOAT. I'm just the GOAT, dude. Yes! So yeah, Team Cherry gave me 2 weeks to prepare for Silksong, and I only needed 1 to prepare for Pantheon 5. Regardless, this challenge was extremely enjoyable, and I am more than hyped for Silksong, which should be releasing 1 day before this video comes out. So if you're interested in watching some of my Silksong, or generally other content, make sure to subscribe, but I'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, stay natty. Peace out.